All right. All right, guys, how's it going? So my name's Dan. I'm going to be running the 5-day SSC workshop for basketball players. So thanks for jumping on. Don't worry if you're not watching this live. You can obviously watch it afterwards when I post it. So I'm always going to keep the intro nice and brief because I just want to go straight into 10 to 15 minutes, just solid quality content that hopefully you can take away and start using. So after this video, I'm also going to post a PDF. That's going to have pretty much every exercise, every assessment for you. It's going to have links to them. So you can basically use the PDF, you can fill it out, you can make notes, and hopefully it'll give you a bit of an idea of how you can start structuring your program as we kind of go through the week, okay? So the first thing I'm going to kind of walk through is just this top section here. So basically everything we're going to talk about today is all going to go into what I like to call like your creative player. So obviously in this case, this is going to be you. So similar to like, when you play 2K, if you played 2K before, you have your creative player, you have different attributes. So for ours, we're just going to look at 4 things. We're going to keep it super simple. I think a lot of SSC coaches tend to overcomplicate it, but I'm just going to try to make sure that you understand what I'm actually talking about today. So number 1, absolute strength. So just thinking, 1 rep max, 3 rep max, squat, bench press, whatever. So your absolute strength here. Explosive strength. This is where we're going to talk about more like, your 2-foot jump, your counter movement jump, your vertical jump, broad jump, just explosive strength. Reactive strength is kind of a subset of explosive strength, but this is more like that pop in your step. It's more things that you tend to see 1-foot jumpers be really good at. Think guys that tend to have quick change of direction, good speed, good agility. That's more that reactive strength ability. And then lastly, coordination. This is more just think mechanics, how your body aligns itself in terms of, when you're jumping, when you're landing, just overall rhythm and flow. So again, we could divide these, several times over, but for the most part, we're just going to keep it simple and keep it just with these 4. So then we're going to look at 3 different areas in terms of testing. So we're going to look at mobility, stability, performance-based stuff. Again, everything here is going to be on the PDF, so I'm not going to go down one by one explaining why. What exercise you should be doing, but I'm just going to give you a few things to think about. Maybe you can relate to it, maybe you can't. But the first one we're going to start off with is mobility. Now, why do we kind of care about mobility? Well, number 1, we need to move better to be able to be strong, explosive, reactive, and coordinated. So we have to have good range of movement at the ankles, the hips, upper back, and your shoulders, things that you probably know already. But ultimately, we need to be strong in these positions. Everything we're doing in basketball is so dynamic. So the big 2 that tend to be the main focus is for me with a lot of my guys, because this is just a common trend, it's going to be ankles and hips. So when you start doing your ankle and your hip assessment, you're probably going to notice this yourself. The big one is usually the ankles. If you've had a lot of ankle sprains, maybe you have really stiff ankles in general, you'll notice that like squatting, certain things in terms of lunge patterns tends to be really difficult. So usually if you're super stiff through your ankles, you tend to be very, very reactive. So you tend to have good pogo scores, reactive scores when we do our RSI test, which we're going to talk about in a second. But you tend to have a very difficult time getting to certain movement patterns. So this is a bit of a trade-off, but I find that the guys who have very stiff ankles and no range of movement tend to be the ones who have the most knee pain, the most knee injuries, the most ACL problems, the most MCL problems. So if you're going to fall in this bracket, the big thing I want you to realize is you probably want to just try to work on it just a little bit so that up the chain is not going to take all the toll of your landing and your jumping, okay? So that's the big one for your ankles. Hips, for the most part, every time we're doing our crossovers, we're driving that first step, your hips always in these crazy positions. And if we're not strong and mobile in those positions, chances are, again, we're going to have a bit of hip problem, lower back problem. But these are the big 2 we tend to focus on. And then your upper back and shoulders. It's rare that we see a lot of guys struggle here, especially through the shoulders, because we're always getting our arms up over our head, especially with our shoot mechanics. So for the most part, when you do your testing, just keep an eye on this, okay? Now we go into a bit more of the stability and performance side, which is going to feed into more of the kind of create a player stuff, which I'm going to go through in a second. Now, before I do go into this, just one thing I forgot is your mobility work is going to kind of go into your warm-up, right? And your cool down. So what I mean by that is usually if you have a fairly good workout or workout program, you're going to maintain a lot of this through your warm-up. But the areas you have to improve, these are the areas that we're going to probably spend a bit more time in your warm-up, right? So obviously if your ankles are tight, we're going to focus on that in your warm-up. If your hips are tight, we're going to focus on that in your warm-up. And then the end of your workout is when the long duration stretching is going to come in, right? That's where we're going to throw all that kind of stuff, your foam rolling, your massage, etc. So this is usually going to play a bit more a part in how you move, but also your warm-up and your cool-down, okay? Now, from a stability perspective, again, on the PDF, all these are laid out for you. The big one that we're going to look at first is proprioception. So just a fancy word of saying balance, right? How your body sees itself in space. So from a balance perspective, what we want to look at is, can we hold one leg up in the air 60 seconds without falling? If you can do that, which most guys can usually pretty easily, then we want to start getting dynamic with it. We want to make it difficult. We want to make sure that we're like throwing objects at each other, you know, juggling, closing our eyes, trying to touch our toes. If you can do this very well and get better at, you know, being more dynamic with it, your risk of injury massively goes down by like 60 to 70%. And knock on wood, ever since I started focusing on this personally and with my guys, it's rare that a lot of my guys and myself get hurt. Then we're going to look at single leg pistol squats. So single leg pistol squats is just a really good way of seeing if there's any imbalances on each leg. For this one, I tend to look at if we can get about 10 to 20, okay, so per leg. So what I usually do here is I'll put a box, maybe a bench or a chair underneath you. You're going to go down nice and controlled, knee always tracking with that mid toe. Again, I explain it in the video. But if you can do 10 minimum, you're probably got a decent strength base. But if you're doing 20, you know, barely breaking a sweat, then it's a very, very good chance that your squat, your trap bar, and your overall lower body strength is going to be very good. So it's an easy assumption to make just off the back of one test. So that's one thing that we do. Push up, pull up. So push up, I know it sounds simple, right? But if you're not doing at least 20 to 30, you need to get your upper body strength up. We don't want to spend too much time on our upper body in terms of our training. It's good to have a good base. But once you get to a certain level, then it's all skill work. It's maintaining this, because you're not going to want to be super heavy up top, because then it just makes the whole game a little bit slower, right? Obviously, there's some guys in the league, especially in the NBA, you look at them, they got massive frames. But for the most part, especially if you're a guard, you're going to try to be fairly light up top, strong for your body weight, but you're going to make sure you have a bit of a base so you can stay quick, agile, mobile, etc. Pull up, pretty straightforward here. Okay, we're going to go 5 to 10. Again, 5, I think it's kind of hit or miss. It's a bit on the low end for me. But if you can do a solid 10 pull-ups, chin over, chest to the bar, it's a good spot to be. From a core perspective, right, we might do things like side planks, we might do regular planks, and we might look at our hip flexors too. Hip flexors tend to be a big one that a lot of guys miss. And I know some of this looks super basic, but the whole point of this is I need you to take it, apply it, go away, and kind of understand how it all works. Because then you can start looking at, you know, structuring your program towards the end of the week on your own. But core work, you know, plank, side plank, hip flexor work. And then this kind of feeds into each other. But our lower back, although it's not something I see all the time, it is a massive area that a lot of our guys tend to have a few issues with, or that I have seen basketball players have issues with in the past. So these are all on the PDF, and you can do that on your own. So like I said, mobility is going to probably focus more in terms of your warm-up. Some of these might add into your warm-up as well. So like your single leg balance work, maybe some of these single leg variations as well, or maybe a bit of core. But your warm-up might be about 10-15 minutes when we start kind of building that together as the week progresses. So that then takes us into the performance. So like I told you, if our single leg stuff's already pretty good, our upper body strength's pretty good, then when we start looking at like our slider, if you want to call it that, so I just put 0 to 100, from a strength perspective, we probably know that we're towards that higher end if we're hitting all these numbers. So already in your head, you should be thinking, okay, mobility, wherever I need to focus on, that's what I'm going to do. And then from a stability perspective, strength perspective, if I'm already on the high end, then I've got a pretty good head start, so I can start focusing maybe on more plyometric type work down the road, okay? So we'll touch that again in a second. But as we go into our performance side of things, so we're going to just, again, keep it fairly simple. Some of this you might be able to do in the gym. Some of it you probably won't have the equipment for it. We obviously have special gear in the studio, like force plates, velocity bar trackers, things that we like to use with our athletes. So from a squat perspective, right, a super easy place to start is just 1 point time body weight, pounds, kilos, whatever you want to use, right? So if you can hit that squat 1.5 or more, then again, we probably know we have a pretty good spot on that strength kind of slider or characteristic. From a trap bar perspective, I like to be around the kind of 2.0 mark, right? 2.5 max, that's pretty heavy when you start getting to that point. But again, generally speaking, trap bar seems to be a little bit easier. Then we go into what we call our RSI tests. So our RSI tests are going to dive into our reactive strength a bit more. So like I said, you know, when you're popping off the floor, you see guys like Zach Levine, guys that jump very well off 1 foot, they tend to have very good RSIs. A bit more compared to the guys I tend to find jump very well off 2 feet. But we're going to do either a 10-5 pogo test. If you're not sure what that is, again, you can just have a quick YouTube. We're also going to do a RSI drop jump. So some of you guys might have done a drop jump or a death jump before. Basically, it's just one of the ways that we can calculate our RSI. So from an RSI perspective, these two here, if you're not around a 2.5 meters per second, and again, I don't want to go too far into it, 2.5 is about the marker you're aiming for. Anything below is below average. Everything above is elite, okay? So I would assume that most guys in the league that play high-level professional basketball are going to be in the high end of an RSI test. And then we have what is our counter movement jump. So this is just our standing vertical jump test, hands on your hips. So we're not trying to use our arm swing. And for the counter movement jump, you're trying to probably be anywhere between kind of 17 and 20 plus minimum, okay? Now, NBA guys, they're around the 28 to 30 marker on average. The reason why I say 17 to 20 is just from experience, having seen the guys that I've tested, the guys who are still on the lower end of this counter movement jump test, if they have good coordination, they have good rhythm, good mechanics, they still tend to be able to dunk, okay? Because obviously they're using their arms, they get some really good momentum. Whereas if you're somebody who's maybe not as athletic in terms of your coordination, then you're probably going to have to be on that higher end because you just need that explosive power to get up above the rim, all right? And this is a bit more applicable for 2-foot jumper, but for the guys who are 1-foot jumpers, they tend to have fairly good counter movement jump scores as well as RSIs, okay? So how do we all kind of put this together? Well, like I said, if your mobility work, and I'm just checking here, guys, make sure I'm on time. I've got 2 minutes left roughly. If we are making sure, you know, that we're kind of covering all this, we've done all of our testing, right? And let's say as an example, my strength for the most part is like a 70, okay? So let's say we're on the 70 for our strength. I'll change colors here so you can see it a bit better. But let's say I'm on about a 70 for strength. And let's say from an explosive perspective, so I've done my counter movement jump, maybe I'm like a 15, all right? So maybe that's like a 40 over here. Then my reactive, maybe I'm below average. So let's say I'm about, I don't know, a 40 over here. And then overall coordination, maybe I'm a little bit better. So I'm like a 60. So already what we know is we have certain areas of mobility that we need to maybe throw into our warm-up. We need to throw into our cool down in terms of stretching, foam rolling, etc. Then from a stability perspective, we've done our strength tests, so we know where we're at. We might have a few things that we can also throw into our warm-up, and we'll go through that as the week goes on. And then from a performance perspective, well, we've done all of our tests, so now we know where we stand. So if I'm looking at you, this is roughly your makeup, then I know, okay, if I bump up your strength a little bit, this is automatically going to impact your explosive and your reactive strength for the better. I can start probably doing a bit more plyometric from an explosive and a reactive perspective, and maybe a little bit of rhythm and flow work. So I'm going to spend more time in these areas, right? Because this is going to be my biggest bang for my buck area. I'm going to try to improve this a little bit, and I'm probably going to try to just like maintain this area while just becoming a bit more efficient. So you can start kind of getting a bit of an idea as to why testing is so important. So off the back of this, I will drop you the PDF with every exercise, the videos to pretty much all of them, with the exception of these. Most of you guys know how to do a squat, a trap bar, deadlift probably. If you're not sure, just ask questions, pop them in the group. And off the back of it, if you need any kind of help just understanding where maybe you are on this scale, just drop me a message and we'll go from there. So that's episode, or day 1, I should say, not episode 1 of the workshops. And tomorrow we go again, 8 o'clock. So I'll make sure I post before so you know what's coming. And there's usually always going to be handouts afterwards. So hopefully that makes sense. Any feedback, much appreciated. And we'll see you soon. See you later.